In the high-stakes world of televised talent competitions, there is a specific brand of lightning that rarely strikes twice. For Jonathan Antoine, that lightning arrived in 2012 in the form of a skeptical glance from Simon Cowell that would eventually be seen by billions. From a news perspective, this wasn't just a talent show audition. It was a cultural flashpoint that weaponized the underdog narrative for global ratings. At only 17 years old, Jonathan was thrust into an international spotlight that he was fundamentally unprepared for. While the media painted a picture of a shy boy finding his voice, the structural reality was far more clinical. The industry saw a product, a pop opera sensation that could bridge the gap between classical prestige and mainstream commercialism. What the public didn't see were the frantic rehearsals and the immense weight of expectation placed on a teenager who, just months prior, was struggling to even attend school classes. Reporters at the time focused on the shock factor of his voice, but the real story was the immediate commodification of his personality. Behind the curtain, the machinery of Sicko and Sony was already grinding, calculating how to turn a viral moment into a multi-million-dollar asset. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was the start of a decade-long battle for autonomy against a system that preferred him to remain a caricature of the gifted outsider. The pressure was so immense that it began to fracture his sense of self almost immediately, setting the stage for a crisis that the cameras were never allowed to capture. While the headlines were celebrating his record deals, Jonathan was quietly reaching a breaking point that nearly ended everything. The transition from a quiet life in Essex to becoming a household name is a psychological trauma that few can navigate. And for Jonathan, the overnight success story had a devastating underbelly. In this investigative look at his early career, we find that the very fame that was supposed to save him was actually exacerbating a deep-seated mental health crisis. Reporters have since uncovered that Jonathan's struggles weren't just stage fright. He was battling a severe nervous breakdown fueled by years of historical trauma and the sudden, crushing weight of public scrutiny. In the news cycles of the early 2010s, mental health wasn't discussed with the nuance it is today. Jonathan was expected to perform, to smile, and to be the humble tenor, while internally, he was dealing with thoughts of ending his own journey. He has since been open about the fact that he reached a point where he nearly offed himself, a revelation that recontextualizes every happy performance from that era. The industry's show must go on mentality meant that despite his psychiatric needs, the schedule remained relentless. This section of his life serves as a cautionary tale for the reality of reality TV. It reveals a young man trapped between his undeniable gift and a mind that was screaming for a break. This period of silent suffering is perhaps the most critical chapter of his story, as it highlights the disconnect between the polished image of a star and the raw, unfiltered pain of a teenager who felt like he was drowning in the very ocean of success he had prayed for. The world thought they were inseparable, but a secret boardroom meeting changed the course of Jonathan and Charlotte's lives forever. The professional separation of Jonathan and Charlotte is often framed as a simple creative choice, but our investigation into the industry logistics suggests a far more complex contractual divorce. When the duo signed with Sony, they weren't just artists, they were a singular brand. However, the internal mechanics of a major label often look for ways to diversify assets. Sources close to the situation at the time suggest that the offer made to the pair was designed to test their loyalty. Two separate, lucrative solo deals. This wasn't just about music, it was about the math of the industry. From a reporter's lens, the split was handled with clinical precision, yet the emotional fallout was palpable. For years, rumors have circulated about the status of their relationship, with many wondering if the shocking distance between them was due to a personal falling out or a professional mandate. While they have both maintained a level of public decorum, the fact that they haven't collaborated in years speaks volumes about the finality of that decision. This move allowed Jonathan to explore his operatic roots without the pop constraints of a duo, but it also stripped away his primary support system on stage. It was a high-risk gamble that forced him to stand alone for the first time, exposing him to a new level of criticism and the terrifying reality of being a solo act in a market that is notoriously fickle. This divorce wasn't just the end of a group. It was the birth of Jonathan Antoine as an independent entity, a transition that would take him nearly a decade to fully master. At age 27, a single medical diagnosis didn't just explain Jonathan's future, it completely rewritten his past. In a move that would redefine his public image in 2022, Jonathan went public with a diagnosis that many in the medical community believe was the missing piece of his narrative: autism. From a journalistic perspective, this revelation was a massive turning point in how we understand child stars. Jonathan described the diagnosis as a moment of recontextualization. For years, his behavior had been labeled by the media as eccentric, shy, or difficult, but the reality was that he was navigating a world not built for his neurotype, while under the harshest spotlight imaginable. This diagnosis allowed him to finally process the sensory overload of his BGT days and the social exhaustion that had led to his previous breakdowns. He began to advocate for the neurodivergent community, using his platform to explain that his quirks were actually symptoms of a brain that processed the world differently. This wasn't just a personal milestone, it was a PR shift. He moved away from being the troubled artist to being an empowered advocate. This transparency had a profound effect on his fan base, creating a deeper, more empathetic connection that transcended his vocal ability. It also explained his shift toward more independent work. He was no longer willing to force himself into the standard mold of a celebrity if it meant sacrificing his mental well-being. By understanding his own mind, Jonathan was finally able to start building a career that worked with him, rather than against him, setting the stage for the physical and professional comeback that would soon follow. The man standing before audiences in 2026 is virtually unrecognizable from the teenager who first took the stage, but the change goes much deeper than just weight loss. The visual transformation of Jonathan Antoine has become one of the most talked about topics in the classical crossover world, but as we look closer, the story isn't just about the scale. Reports indicate that Jonathan has lost over 5 stone, a journey that reached its peak between 2024 and 2025. In the news, this is often treated as a glow-up, but for Jonathan, it was an act of reclamation. He spent his youth being defined by his size, often used as a visual shorthand for the unlikely talent. By taking control of his physical health, he was effectively stripping away the character the media had created for him. He began documenting his commitment to walking 10,000 steps a day and overhauling his lifestyle, not for aesthetic reasons, but for survival. This section of his life is characterized by a newfound discipline that mirrors his vocal training. However, the unrecognizable photos that went viral in late 2025 also sparked a new wave of speculation. Some wondered if the pressure to look a certain way had finally caught up to him, or if this was the final step in his journey toward self-love. The reality appears to be the latter. He has emerged in 2026 with a level of confidence that was entirely absent during his rise to fame. This physical evolution served as an external manifestation of the internal work he had been doing since his diagnosis. He was no longer hiding. He was standing tall, literally and figuratively, preparing to re-enter the spotlight on his own terms. He walked away from the billion-dollar labels, and what he's building now is an empire that Simon Cowell never saw coming. As we look at the state of Jonathan Antoine in 2026, we see an artist who has successfully navigated the transition from reality TV product to independent mogul. The news out of his camp this year has been focused on his total departure from the traditional label system. He has embraced the digital frontier, using streaming platforms and direct-to-fan engagement to fund his projects, including his highly anticipated work on All of Me. This move is a direct challenge to the industry that once controlled him. Furthermore, He has expanded his portfolio into voice acting, lending his powerful resonance to the gaming industry, a move that highlights his versatility and his desire to explore creative avenues that don't rely solely on his opera boy image. During his most recent public addresses, he has hinted at a massive global tour that would be entirely self-produced, a feat that is nearly unheard of for a classical artist of his caliber. This is the story of a man who took the fragments of a shattered early career and rebuilt them into something sustainable. He isn't chasing the charts anymore. He's chasing legacy. The rumors of his disappearance have been thoroughly debunked by his active and thriving independent presence. Jonathan Antoine in 2026 is a survivor of the fame machine who chose integrity over easy money, proving that while the next Pavarotti tag was a gift, being Jonathan Antoine is the real victory. The survivor's legacy. The journey of Jonathan Antoine is more than just a sequence of career milestones. It's a case study in human resilience. From the exposed vulnerability of his first audition to the shocking strength of his 2026 comeback, he has remained a figure of fascination. He reminds us that fame is a double-edged sword that can cut through the spirit if not handled with care. As he continues to break boundaries and challenge the expectations of what a talent show winner should be, one question remains for the audience to ponder. In a world that constantly tries to put us in boxes, are we brave enough to do what Jonathan did and break out of them? The man we see today is no longer a discovery. He is a self-made icon who proves that the most beautiful songs are often written after the hardest storms.